What you said.
Yeah. You're going to be live, by the way. We're going live right now. But you can't start until I go live at Facebook, so I'll let you know when we're okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'd like to open by thanking our sponsors for this week's class. Jeff and Lori Goldchin are sponsoring. This is in honor of all of the Rebbitzins from Chabad all over the world that had a conference in New York this past week, including their daughter. They came from 100 countries around the world and spent a nice few days together planning for the future year of programs and workshops and outreach events for communities literally all over the world. In Chabad, the Rebbitzins take just as much as importance as the rabbis, and to have a conference in New York attended by 5,000 Rebbitzins from throughout the world is an amazing accomplishment, and therefore the class is dedicated in their honor. It's also sponsored by Michael Goldenfeld. This is in honor of a recovery for his father, Nachman Moshe ben Estadino, who had surgery, and Baruch Hashem came out okay. He should be blessed with good health and a long life. So we have been talking last week and the week before. The book of Deuteronomy tells the Jewish people that when they enter the land, there will be a particular location that God would designate. We know it to be the Temple Mount. We know it to be Jerusalem. That's the city that God is referencing. And the Temple Mount within the city is the mountaintop of where the Holy Temple will be built. And all of the Jewish people would come from all over the world to visit. And yet what we've been talking about is the fact that in the 5 books of Moses, by name Yerushalayim is not mentioned. But once we get into the book of prophets, then it's mentioned close to 1,000 times. And we asked the question last week, why would it be so that Jerusalem by name is not mentioned? So some may say, well, it wasn't called Jerusalem back then. It was called Shalem. It was called Yira, that the combination of the two first came later. That's questionable because we do find Egyptian artifacts from that period of time that come very close to having a name such as Jerusalem for what later became the capital of Israel. The other reasons that we said was that if the city would have been identified before the Jewish people even got into Israel, then the Canaanites would have sought to it that we would never capture it. They would fortify it. The other reason we gave was because we didn't want to have friction amongst the tribes of Israel as to who was going to get the piece of Jerusalem. But we also started last week explaining that there's something else deeper going on here. And that is that Jerusalem is more than just one physical place in the world. That there's a Jerusalem within each and every single one of us. That we carry Jerusalem within us, within our soul. So whatever it is, wherever it was, the Jewish people were exiled to throughout their vast history, Jerusalem came with them. We have always been Jerusalem focused. We have never forgotten Jerusalem. Jerusalem has always been on our minds, in our prayers, in our deeds, in our actions. Every wedding we go to, we remember Jerusalem. Every event we do, we remember Jerusalem. We carry Jerusalem wherever it is that we go. And then we spoke about this verse that is said when the ark is open. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, a verse that comes from Isaiah that says that the day will come that from Zion, Ki mitzion, from Zion teitzei Torah, the words of Torah will come out. Udvar Hashem, and the words of God, Yerushalayim, from Jerusalem. And you're very familiar with that phrase. Many temples have that phrase engraved above their ark. That is what's sung by congregations throughout the world. In congregation, for all these years, we've always said that verse. And it's a messianic prophecy that at some point the nations of the world will turn to the Jew and say, show us the pathway to God. And mitzion, it will come forth from Zion. So what we were discussing was God telling us about Zion and Jerusalem. What is Zion? What is Zion? What does Zionist really mean? Not what the phrase is used for, but what is the meaning of the word as it's found in the Bible. So Zion is another name for Jerusalem, but Zion has a meaning. The word Zion itself is a banner. It means a lamppost, something that you hang up high for people to see. It's a message for the world, Mitzion. It's when the Jew walks the world, and the Jew walks the world as a banner, a statement, a teaching, that there's something, a message that we have to give to the world. And it all goes back to our forefather Abraham. Abraham, Echad HaYavram. Abraham was one individual. He was one man in his time. He had this peculiar chutzpah about him. Because on one hand, he was a very humble individual, a very friendly individual. But he also was stubborn in the sense of that he would not cave into from his beliefs. The pressure of the world could not change his belief in one God. And instead, he did the opposite. In his humility and with his friendship, he convinced many to follow in his path, to give up ways of idol worshiping and follow the belief in one God. So here comes this question. If we're here to be this banner for the world, be a light unto the nations, bring goodness to the world, to enrich and elevate people, why then have the Jewish people been so hated? If we're here to do so much good, and as God says to Abraham, to bring blessings to all the families on the face of the earth, my goodness, here's a group of people whose sole mission is to bring blessings to everyone, and yet we're the most hated of them all.
Because of the jealousy.
Okay,
Yes.
What else?
Because of the what?
And
She said jealousy.
Also, the human nature, always they want to do bad things. So that the Jewish people, they prevent them, teach them not to do that.
So it's like, I think Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof asks the question is like, I know we're the chosen people, but once in a while, can you choose someone else? It didn't work out that good for us to be this chosen people. You know, we could have been some little island of China or Japan somewhere. Just give us a little peninsula somewhere and let us do Torah there. Well, then leave us alone. No, we're told to be a light unto the nations, to be a banner, to broadcast our name to the world. Yes?
A couple of reasons. Jealousy is outstanding. I think that's the number one. But the number two is, if I am a Mormon, and my Mormon religion is correct, then why don't you join me? The same went from Christianity, and Luther assumed that we would join him. Mohammed assumed that we would join him. And when we didn't, both of them reacted in very warlike to the Jewish people.
And yet, interestingly enough,
Wait, one
yeah,
more.
go ahead.
Hitler actually believed Nietzsche.
Mhm.
Nietzsche said that we could be a Superman, and he then interpreted that the Aryan race would be the chosen people. But here we are, the chosen people, therefore we have to eliminate the other chosen people, for his chosen people will be the chosen people.
Yeah. See, you're all touching upon some of the points here that I'd like to make. You know, you even see it just in the last 2 weeks. There's been tragedies in Israel, one after the next. I mean, the kids waiting at a bus stop on Friday and to be mowed down, two brothers, a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, their father's in critical condition. I mean, the tragedy of it, the heartbreak of it, and yet, in the news, it's a tit-for-tat thing. Well, Israel did a raid in Jenin, so this is what happens. No, one's a terrorist attack and one's stopping terrorism. But we've seen this so often in the media, that Israel is vilified for just trying to survive, where the other nations could do no wrong. And it's been this way, by the way, for thousands of years. It's just that now that we have social media, we're able to actually see other footage and see the other side of the story, and it hurts. So I want to start with a story. I know last week, those in Los Angeles or basketball fans continued to hear the name of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar mentioned in the news. The reason his name was mentioned, anyone know?
Yeah, his record was...
Because his record was broken, right, by LeBron James. His most points in NBA history, his record was surpassed. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was by the game and congratulated LeBron James for passing his record. But I want to tell you a story about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was actually born Ferdinand Lewis, that was his name, Lou Alcindor Jr. But in 1971, he converted to Islam, and he changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. A number of years ago, there was a meeting set up between Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and then Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Yisroel Meir Lau. Rabbi Lau's son is now the chief rabbi, but if you go back a few administrations, the father, Rabbi Yisroel Meir Lau, was the chief rabbi of Israel. He's now the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. And there was a meeting set up between the Laker Center and the chief rabbi of Israel. Now, what could these two individuals have in common? Why is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar flying to Israel to meet with the chief rabbi of Israel? It turns out Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was working on a film about World War II. And in the process, he wanted to honor his father's last wish to him. Before his father, Ferdinand Alcindor, passed away, he asked his son that one day I want you to travel to Israel. And I want you to meet someone for me. And he asked him to find Rabbi Lau and meet with him. Why? Because when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's father was in the military, he was part of the American soldiers that liberated Buchenwald. And there was a picture of him holding an 8-year-old Jewish child. When they liberated the concentration camp, there was this little kid there. Most of the kids didn't survive. There was one kid there, and as they're being liberated, he lifted the child and he carried him.
Rabbi Lau or?
An 8-year-old child
Who's the carrier?
who turned out to be, he grew up to become the chief rabbi of Israel. So there is a photo of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's father holding a little boy walking out of a concentration camp, and that little boy grows up to become the chief rabbi of Israel. And Jabbar's father heard that the kid in the picture is now this Yisroel Meir Lau. He was already too old to make the trip. So he tells his son, one day I want you to go to Israel and I want you to meet this kid who's not the kid anymore. So the people asked Rabbi Lau, do you remember this particular photo? Do you remember this man? So he says, I actually remember his father so well. More than just the photo shoot. First of all, he was big and strong. He was a huge, strong man. And it wasn't just that he carried me through the gate for a photo opportunity. He continued to carry me as we passed different residents. And we passed this German city of Weimar. And there were some of the Gentiles of the city standing on the road. And the American troops are coming by. And this man that was holding me turns to the fellows on the road and he begins yelling at them. What did this child do to you? What did this child do to you? Did he threaten you so much that you needed to wage war against his people and wipe out millions of people like him? Shame on you. And I remember him yelling these words, shame on all of you. And that's why Kareem Abdul-Jabbar traveled to Israel to meet with Rabbi Yisroel Meir Lau. So why? Why indeed? The same question that Kareem's father had as he's walking out of a concentration camp is the same question that has bogged us throughout history. Why? Why the hate? So I'll read to you some of the best answers of the question are written by non-Jews, including I'll read you this brief excerpt from an essay. It is difficult for all other nations of the world to live in the presence of the Jews. It is irritating and most uncomfortable. The Jews embarrass the world as they have done things which are beyond the imaginable. They have become moral strangers since the day their forefather Abraham introduced the world to high ethical standards and to the fear of heaven. They brought the world the 10 Commandments which many nations prefer to defy. They violated the rules of history by staying alive, totally at odds with common sense and historical evidence. They outlived all of their former enemies, including vast empires such as the Romans and the Greeks. They angered the world with their return to their homeland after 2,000 years of exile and after the murder of 6 million of their brothers and sisters. They aggravated mankind by building in the wink of an eye a democratic state which others had not been able to create in even hundreds of years. They built living monuments such as the duty to be holy and the privilege to serve one's fellow man. They had their hands in every human progressive endeavor, whether in science, in medicine, in psychology, or other disciplines, while totally out of proportion to their actual numbers. They gave the world the Bible, and they even gave the world their Savior. Jews taught the world not to accept the world as it is, but to transform it. Yet only a few nations wanted to listen. Moreover, the Jew introduced the world to one God, yet only a minority wanted to draw the moral consequences. So the nations of the world realized that they would have been lost without the Jews. And while their subconscious tries to remind them of how much Western civilization is framed in terms of concepts first articulated by the Jews, they do anything to suppress it. They deny that Jews remind them of a higher purpose of life and the need to be honorable, and do anything to escape its consequences. It is simply too much to handle for them, too embarrassing to admit, and above all, too difficult to live by. This is written by a Christian. We don't want to be honest and say the real reason, but we all know the real reason. They make us feel guilty. We don't like feeling guilty. Hitler, Yamach Shemai, said this himself. He said, conscience is a Jewish invention. He says, it's a blemish like circumcision. We don't want to have a conscience. We want to be able to do as a human being whatever we desire to do. And we don't need some conscience or divine book or 10 commandments or laws of morality and ethics dictating our freedoms. So we serve as this conscience of humanity, that people who wish to distance themselves from their own humanity cannot stand to have us around. In the words of historian Paul Johnson, he says, the Jew stands at the center of the perennial attempt to give human life the dignity of a purpose. And so it will only make sense that those who seek to deny human life this dignity of purpose would despise the Jews. Because let's face it, none of us like our alarm clock. We all have one, but we don't like it. Because we would wish that it would go away, especially when we're sleeping. You don't need this buzzing sound in our ear. Now, we know why we have it, because without which we're not getting up to go to work and do what we need to do. But we are that alarm clock to the world. We are buzz to the world about moral and ethical behavior and moral and ethical failures. And so as a result, we become its scapegoats, its sacrificial lambs, as you may want to call it. Now, not everyone is complicit in the slaughter of the Jews or the demonization of the Jews. In this country, we've had great friendships with the citizens of the United States since the beginning of the United States of America. And the support of this country for Israel is known throughout the world. Even if you have sometimes conflicts in the Congress, the fact is this country stands in support of Israel and gives the freedom to the Jewish people to practice as they wish. You know, there's a very few pictures of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. Pictures there were, but movie films, there were very few taken. But the day that the previous Rebbe became a citizen of the United States of America, he asked that it be filmed. And you see the They came to his office, he picked up his hand, took the oath to become a citizen of this country, because he wanted it to be known how special of an event this was, that he became a citizen of this country, because of the freedom that this country has given its citizens, and specifically given its people for religious purposes, to pray as you wish and practice as you wish, something that's been denied to us in so many parts of the world for thousands of years. But in many parts of the world, the Jew has been the victim, the scapegoat, the target. And what these civilizations fail to realize is that the Jews are only the canaries in the coal mine. Because what ends up happening with the Jews will end up happening with other people as well. First, they'll discriminate against the Jew, but that discrimination will not stop with the Jew. It will continue. As someone famously said about the Holocaust, first they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist, and so on until they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. And that's the way it's always been. And that's the way it is today. Islamic terrorism started with a war against Israel, but it didn't stop there. 9/11 wasn't an attack on Israel, wasn't an attack on Jewish people per se. It was an attack on this country. And so while evil acts might always start against the Jews, the conscience of the world, that's not where it ends. It's built into the DNA of the world, and it's the reality of the human condition. As it goes with the Jews, so it will go with all of civilizations. Remember, it was about maybe 15 years ago, the Iran Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, he put out a call for all of Islam, not just for the people in Iran, but for all of Islam, to boycott anything and everything that originates with the Jewish people. Now, it sounds like, oy vey, we're not going to sell that many Jaffa oranges in Iran, right? But he said, no, it's not just what comes from Israel. Anything that comes from the Jewish people, we're going to boycott. So in response, some very smart Jews, out of the kindness of their hearts, put together a guidebook for Muslims. If you want to follow Khamenei's law, his edict, we're going to listen, we're going to make it easy for you. These are the things you should boycott. For example, any Muslim who has syphilis, you can't take the cure for it because it was discovered by a Jew. If you even want to find out if you have it, it was created by someone named Wasserman. It's the Wasserman test. You can't even find that out. And he goes on, if you have heart disease, you can't use a stent, you can't use this, you can't do that. Why? All from Jews. You have a toothache, you have a cavity, no Novocaine for you. Why? That was figured out by the Jew, how to apply it so that you don't feel the pain of a toothache or a cavity. He goes on and on. If you have diabetes, if you have a headache, if you have convulsions, diphtheria, ear damage, brain damage, treatments for all of those discovered by Jews. So Muslims, sorry, got to follow Al-Khamenei's thing. You can't use any of it. But it's not just limited to medical issues. There are so many other ways that you can stage this anti-Jewish boycott. You give up your computers and your cell phones and your text messages and your WhatsApps. All of these are somehow connected, either discovered in Israel or by Jews, by Israelis. Give it all up. The Talmud spells it out clearly. The Talmud says this: if the nations of the world would only have known how much they benefit from the Holy Temple, how many blessings come into the world because of the worship that took place in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, they would have surrounded the Temple Mount with their own soldiers to protect the Holy Temple from destruction. Had they only known that the Jews are not only praying for themselves in the Holy Temple, they bring offerings for peace throughout the world, for blessings throughout the world, that the world is always on their mind, that God showed kindness to all of humanity. Had they only understood The holiness of the Temple Mount was not just to preserve and protect the Jewish people, but it was to bring blessings to all the families of the earth. They would have protected the Holy Temple. Instead, they destroyed it. You take a look at the population centers, especially in Europe, they used to have these thriving Jewish communities. You travel to Poland and you go to some of the Städtlach that used to be filled with Jews, thriving communities. And they're stricken with poverty, abandoned. They've never been back to the way they used to be when the Jewish people lived there. They never recovered that life, that vibrancy when the Jews were there. There's a fellow, Mr. Gordon Zaks, a very active and influential leader of Jewish federations throughout the country, who's based in New York. And he was invited by then President Bush Sr. to the White House. They were hosting President Yeltsin. And President Yeltsin was there for a state dinner. And because they wanted to fill the room with all different people, they invited Gordon Zaks to be there. And in fact, on the welcoming line, Gordon Zaks was standing right next to President and Mrs. Bush. And Yeltsin comes and shakes the president's hand, and President Bush introduces Yeltsin to Mr. Gordon Zaks, and he says, this is the man that helped and so instrumental in immigrating so many of the Jews from Russia to Israel. So, because Yeltsin would open the doors and allow Jews to travel. And Gordon Zaks was very instrumental from the United States and from the White House to bring this about. So they're meeting each other. They had worked together, but now they're seeing each other face to face. And Yeltsin says to Gordon Zaks, is there anything we can do now to convince the Jews to move back? It was silly that we made life so difficult for them that they all wanted to leave when we need them. You think about the brain power that left the old Soviet Union and went to Israel, of scientists and doctors and philosophers and authors and artists and plain simple folk. These are good citizens to have in your country. And when you empty your country of so much brain power, of so much innovation, of invention, you're all going to suffer from it. So the author Olive Schreiner, she wrote the following: the study of history of Europe during the past centuries teaches us one uniform lesson. The nations which received and in any way dealt fairly and mercifully with the Jew have prospered, and the nations that have tortured and oppressed the Jew have written their own curse. Of course, she was only echoing the words which we find in the book of Genesis, God saying to Abraham, those who curse you will be cursed. Those who bless you will be blessed. That's the way it has always been. This woman from a Chabad community in Brooklyn in Crown Heights was once pulled over by a police officer for a traffic violation. So a police officer comes to the window, can I see your license and then the registration? And he sees hanging in the car is a picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he says, are you a follower of the rabbi? And she says, yes, I am. He says, you have time for a story? She says, it's your time. You pulled me over. So he says, I think you're the first Jewish person that I'm sharing this story with. As you probably know, the Rebbe would often go to the burial site of his father-in-law, to the Montefiore Cemetery in Queens, and he would pray by his father-in-law's gravesite, and he would go quite often. Today, that's the same gravesite he's buried. The Lubavitcher Rebbe is buried right next to his father-in-law, and again, it's one of the most, as far as in all of New York, more people come to visit that location at all times of day and night than any other place in New York. But that the Rebbe, when the Rebbe was alive, he would go quite often and pray by his father-in-law's grave, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. So the police officer is saying, whenever he would go, he would be accompanied by a police escort. And I was often assigned to that duty. So I would escort the Rebbe's car to the cemetery. When we got to the cemetery, we stayed by our car. The Rebbe went in and prayed, sometimes for hours, and we would come out. Again, we would escort the car back to Crown Heights. There were also other cars that would go along with this entourage. Some of them were some of the boys from 770. They also kind of formed like this honor guard. They unofficially escorted the Rebbe's car. And they would hang out in the cemetery next to our car. So we became friends, me and some of these Chabad yeshiva students. And one time I overhear they're all excited because they heard a story about the Rebbe, that the Rebbe gave someone a blessing and the blessing came true, and they're all excited about it. And I'm listening to this. Now, I'm not Jewish, I'm Irish. But it interested me, and I said to them, so tell me, does the rabbi give blessings to people that aren't Jewish as well? And they say, of course. He'll offer his blessings and his prayers to anyone. So he said, and how can I speak with him then? Well, they said, well, you're the one driving the escort. When he comes out of the cemetery to go to his car, stand next to his car. The Rebbe, and this I remember even as a child, sometimes we would meet up, we would wait on the corner of President Street in Brooklyn, wait to see the Rebbe coming from his house, and we would walk maybe like 10 feet behind the Rebbe. But anytime the Rebbe would see a police officer, he would stop and he would salute, every time. So I remember this even as a 5-year-old child, always seeing the Rebbe stop by police officers. He would always show that respect. So they tell him, you're a police officer. If you're standing next to his car, there's no question the Rebbe will stop before getting to his car. He'll motion to you, and that will be your opportune time to speak to him. So he's telling this to this woman that he pulled over to give a traffic violation ticket to. So I did that. I stood by near the Rebbe's car. The Rebbe came out, took a look at me, started the salute, and I wanted to start speaking, and I choked up. I found myself suddenly all emotional. I didn't know, I just knew he was a holy man that would pray over here and that we were told to escort him, but suddenly I'm looking at him in the face and I feel something. And he looks to me because he knows I want to say something, and he says, what can I do for you? And I say, do you only pray for Jewish people, or would you pray for a non-Jew as well? And the Rebbe said, I'll pray for anyone. So I told him our situation. My wife and I have been married for 9 years, and we haven't been blessed with children. And we've been going from doctor to doctor to doctor with no success. And the doctors are telling us to accept that we're not going to have children, and we refuse to accept it because we believe in God. And we hope for a miracle, but it's been 9 years. Would you pray for me, Rabbi? So the Rebbe says to him, I need your name. Give me your name. Give me your father's name. Give me your wife's name and your wife's father's name. Write it down for me. They quickly run and find a piece of paper. They write down. The Rebbe takes the note and says, I'll pray for you and for your wife. And the police officer says to this woman, man, I'm not kidding you. It wasn't too long after my wife became pregnant. The doctors were baffled, but I wasn't. I knew what happened. I mean, I knew whoever this man was, he gave us a blessing, he prayed for us, and my wife has a child. Now here's the kicker. It was a boy. I told my wife, we're going to name him Mendel. Because Menachem Mendel gave us the blessing. We're going to name our child the same name as the Lubavitcher Rebbe. My wife thought I was crazy. It's the first child we have. We want to give him an American name, a Bob, a Jim, or something. What, Mendel? And I said, because every time we say his name, we should remember what this rabbi did for us. And she said, okay, it makes sense. She was easy. My parents, oh, they went nuts. You're an Irish family. What are you doing giving your kid a Jewish name? Do you know what anti-Semitism is like out there? Do you need your kid discriminated against wherever he goes? Do you need your kid bullied in school because he's got a Jewish name and kids are going to think he's Jewish? And I said, that's exactly how I want my kid to grow up. I want my kid to grow up knowing what is hate out there and what is love out there. I want my kid to grow up with the name Mendel. If people think he's Jewish and they discriminated against him for that, I want him to grow up with the courage to be able to stand up for what is right and for what is good. So, you're looking at this proud Irish police officer that has a son named Mendel. Now drive safely and have a good day. So one of the primary mitzvot that we have as a Jew is to make a Kiddush Hashem, is to sanctify God's name, is that when people see us, they give blessings to God. That we're transparent. It's not the Jew that wants the praise. It's the fact that if the Jew lives the life they're supposed to, people will come closer to God. People will believe more in God. And the way we make a Kiddush Hashem, the way we sanctify God's name, the way we give God's a good name, is when we behave the way we're supposed to. So that when people see us acting honestly and uprightly, we give the Jewish people a good reputation and we give God a good reputation. So when we eat and when we sleep and when we study and when we worship and we conduct our business, when we interact with others in an elevated and dignified manner, by definition, that is a Kiddush Hashem, that's a sanctification of God's name. That's the way we live as an ambassador of God. That's what it means to be a member of the chosen people. This rabbi in South Africa once lodged this complaint with the general manager of a radio station. And he says, you always give disproportionate amount of time to coverage that shames the Jewish community. If anything negative happens and the person's a Jew, you go over and over, it was a Jew, it was a Jew, it was a Jew. And you don't do that with any other people. And it just seems so way out of size that you're continuously having negative news about the Jewish community. And at first the manager tried to deny it, but after the rabbi presented him with the proof, with the statistical proof, look at the amount of time of negative stories about the Jewish community. He said, what can I tell you? Jews are news. Jews are news. And you've seen that. It's always there. If there's something about the Jews, that word Jew is always going to be found. Now, whether that's fear or not, the fact is that Jews are scrutinized far more carefully than others. Like it or not, every single one of us is a representative of our faith. We are a representative of our people. We are a representative of God. And the more we keep that in mind, that it's not just us, the individual, but we represent something. That's what it means to be part of the chosen people. That we are representing all of the people, we're representing God, we're representing Torah, wherever it is that we go, and people will look at us through those eyes. A rabbi was once invited to a meeting with the editor-in-chief of the Detroit Free Press. This was at a time where Israel was getting a lot of bad press in the news, and Israel put out this calling, if rabbis can suddenly meet with their editors, go to your local papers, and talk to them on Israel's behalf. Help change the mood of the media. So this rabbi lived in Detroit, and the Detroit Free Press was not really a critical paper of Israel, but because it was the paper that he was closest to, he had a meeting with the chief editor. And he goes on his talk about Israel and the importance of Israel and the ally Israel, the United States, and how it gets a bad rap in the American media. And the editor says, I took the meeting not because I needed to hear your plea, because I've always been very fair to Israel and very kind to Israel. But I took this meeting because I wanted to tell you why that is. Why this newspaper is more pro-Israel than most papers. And he begins to tell him this story. My mother, he said, immigrated to America from Ireland as an uneducated 18-year-old girl. She came to this country as an 18-year-old. Upon arriving on these shores, she was hired as a housekeeper. That was her job. A housekeeper and a nanny. That's the way she supported herself. The home happened to be a home of an Orthodox Jewish family. In fact, the man of the house was the president of the local Orthodox synagogue. Now, my mother, as this 18-year-old, knew nothing about Judaism and probably never met a Jew before in her life. So everything was new to her. These are all strange traditions, new traditions, kosher food, all these things that are new and different, but she really enjoyed this family, and they became close. This family went on a vacation, and they left my mother in the house, and the father of the house gave my mother an envelope of some cash for anything that she needed while they were away. It was the month of December, and on the calendar, this family was returning December 24th in the evening.
Okay.
So my mother's thinking to herself, they're not going to be here for the 2 weeks leading up to Xmas. They're going to come back on December 24th. Everyone has their house decorated. Everyone has their tree. And this poor family is not going to have enough time to decorate their house and put up a tree. So I'm going to surprise them. She takes the envelope of money that was left for her own, that she could use as she felt needed. And she went and she bought the most beautiful tree. And she bought beautiful decorations. And she spent the days leading up to the return of this family decorating the home. It had lights, it had everything you need. And right there in the front window of the house, she opens the curtains and she parks this beautiful tree. The family's coming back from their vacation. They pull up at a house they think is theirs, but no, it's the wrong house. I thought this was our house, but it's not our house. Obviously, it's not our house. So they go another door down, but that's not our house either. Very confused. Our house is decorated for the holiday, and it's not our holiday. So they come into the house. Now understand, the man is the president of the city's largest Orthodox synagogue. The house is a half a block from the congregation, from the synagogue. Everyone on their way to services pass this house. So you can imagine what he's thinking about, what he's going to face at morning services, about how his house looks. My mom is waiting the excitement from this family. It's so nice what you did. Thank you so much. You know, we were afraid that we weren't going to have our house decorated. So after the family enters the house, the man of the house calls my mother into his study. My mother's name was Mary. And he says this to her, Mary, in my whole life, no one has ever done such a beautiful thing for us. This is the most beautiful, touching thing that anyone has ever done. And I want to thank you so much on behalf of my entire family. It's so beautiful. So first of all, you spent some money on this that I left for you. I want to reimburse you for that. Secondly, I want to give you a holiday gift on top of that. And third, I want to explain that we have a different holiday. I don't want you to be embarrassed or insulted that I'm taking it down, but I'm going to donate it to a house that couldn't afford it, and this will all be in your honor. He was so delicate with my mother, so loving to my mother, so respectful to my mother. You could imagine what it could have been. How could you do such a thing? We're Jewish, don't you know? Instead, my mother was treated as a queen. My mother never forgot the kindness shown to her that December 24th. And when she raised us, she made sure that we all knew that story and how beautiful of a people the Jewish people are. So when I became the editor-in-chief of this newspaper, I knew to look for the truth about Israel, to look for the truth about the Jewish people. And that's why this newspaper has always been kind to Israel. Now I want you to think about this. When the fellow reacted the way he reacted, not the way emotionally we would think we would react, but when he took a step and he stopped to think about from her perspective what she did, the kindness that and he acted like a mensch. When he did that, I don't believe it ever entered his mind that if I do this, and years later Mary will get married, and Mary is going to have a son, and the son is going to be the editor-in-chief of a newspaper, and Israel is going to need that editor-in-chief, so I better do it this way. Which means when we do what we have to do, good things will happen. It's not that we're planning for it. It's not that we're expecting it. It's automatic. That's how the world runs. The Jew acts like a member of the chosen people. Good things will come from it, for the Jew and for the world. Whether it takes a year or a decade or a century, good deeds have a way of living on and living on and living on. Tzion, that's our task, is to be the banner, to do things in a proper way so that the world sees us, the world recognizes us, and good things will come forth from that. We'll stop at this point. We'll continue on the subject of Zion and Jerusalem next week. There's lunch for everyone. I look forward to seeing you all back here, whether in person, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you are. It's good to have you along with us.
It's good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Jacob, how did it go? You good? Okay. So you have my